I'm Head of Development and Design at Milton Keynes Council and responsible for urban design, property, architecture and sponsorship. And as you probably know, Milton Keynes is expanding. It's actually 40 years old this last year, 41 years old now. And a very successful new town by any kind of judgment. But of course not perfect, and designed in the 1960s really, when we were in a completely different age, you know, in terms of the environment and socio-cultural issues really. And so we're looking at to really build on the strengths of Milton Keynes as we expand and then after expansion grow. And the area that Richard's actually working in is not an expansion area, but a growth area. This is kind of second phase, which is much more contentious. But I thought it's interesting that Richard put up a lot of positive things about suburbs. And I put up this question because is suburbia still an appropriate term in the 21st century? And I know, you know, we have a lot of areas which are suburban, which are already built. And I can't really read that from here. But suburbia kind of implies that it's subservient to or dependent upon urbia. You know, it's actually, it can't exist on its own. And typically, it has needs in terms of employment, centres of excellence, say hospitals and that kind of thing, higher education, culture, entertainment and shopping, which is kind of delivered somewhere else. And of course, you know, some of those things are delivered locally. And the whole issue about what's a suburb and what isn't a suburb, you know, is Walthamstow a suburb or is it actually an urban centre? And of course, it's different to Hainault or Chigwell or somewhere like that. And so, you know, suburbs do deliver all these things, but the kind of traditional notion of suburb is to escape the urban hell. And of course, because of the need to commute into the urban hell, they're inextricably linked to it. But what's on the kind of right-hand side says that, you know, are things actually changing with 21st century technology, ICT for instance? And, you know, it's well documented that in the 1950s, technology then actually kind of changed sociocultural shift. There's a very famous book by Robert Putnam called The Decline of Bowling Alone, with bowling at least closing down, the decline of social capital in the United States, where people became very focused on the inside of the house, stopped going out. ICT, interestingly, you know, could actually produce a change, and it could change the nature of suburbs, because, you know, you can have distance learning, for instance. You don't actually have to leave the suburb to go to university. Not saying that that's particularly, you know, a great idea, but you know, you don't have to do that. You can work from home, and home working is becoming, you know, more and more prevalent. And if you work from home, I mean, the absolute key thing about a neighbourhood, you know, real sense of place, you will never have one if it's a housing estate where everybody leaves during the day. And, you know, people make neighbourhoods, people make communities, and people make sustainable suburbia. And so you actually need to have that ability to stay there, really. And so there's evidence from the US, in Blacksburg in particular, which was wired by IBM, a town of about 45,000 people, years ago. And they put Dr. Elizabeth Kavanagh in there to actually monitor what happened. And there's evidence coming out there that people actually meet on the internet, you know, have common interests, and then they have the need for physical space, you know, because you can't be in a dance troupe over the internet, really. And then evidence from Europe, of course, particularly in Holland. There's an example in Almere, which is Milton Keynes' twin town, where they've relaxed zoning laws in some areas of the city, so you can employ up to 6 people in your house, and so you can actually develop small businesses locally, and again linked in with the world through new technology. And so that has a positive impact on local services. You know, if you are working from home, how do you avoid social isolation? You go and meet your neighbours instead of your workmates. Where do you meet? Corner cafe, that kind of thing. And you begin to build up neighbourhoods which actually have real substance rather than just simply denuded housing estates. Distance learning shopping, I covered that, and then virtual public services. You know, a lot of the London, I used to work for London Borough of Islington years ago, and along with a lot of London boroughs, I spent an awful lot of money on putting local centres everywhere. You don't have to do that now. With video conferencing, you can get access from a neighbourhood, from a library or from anything really, into all your public services, and the only expert that you actually need in that video cabin is actually the person who knows how to work the technology. And so there's a lot of things to actually look at with suburbia to actually, I mean, in terms of real sustainable suburbia, you know, the more that we can keep people put, you know, where they are, the more sustainable it actually is, and the more chance of actually developing a real neighbourhood. 5,000 people is a small town. Or Western Expansion area, 5,000 homes is 6,000 homes, which is equivalent to the size of Buckingham. So these are, we're talking about small towns, really. That's the only slide. Well, it's another one with lots of writing on, but that's the only one more. Oh, yeah. That's just... I mean, you know where Milton... Oh, there we go. That's where Milton Keynes is. I mean, it is equidistant between Birmingham and London, Cambridge and Oxford. Very well located with the West Coast Main Line and the M1. What is Milton Keynes? And this is actually an aerial of Milton Keynes with the grid road superimposed on it. And you can see that the grid road is actually more like a net than actually a grid, and sort of follows the field pattern. And that's kind of a metaphor for Milton Keynes because it does disappear into the landscape. And it's one of its kind of benefits and also one of its detriments, because as a visitor you haven't got a clue where you are, and you know, legibility and permeability and connectivity are actually very, very restricted. But at the same time, once you're there, it's an insider's place. People enjoy living there because it has some real special qualities. People don't enjoy visiting. I'm going to talk about two suburbs, actually, to you know, compare what suburb actually means and the kind of paradox of some of these suburbs. The first one is Wolverhampton, which Richard mentioned. Yeah, this is Wolverhampton. On the left-hand side is part of the old town. It was a railway town, 1840 something, laid out on a grid. The railway works is at the top corner, and it depended entirely on the railway works for its livelihood. The railway works is still in operation, some of it, and then on the other side is an extension to Wolverhampton that we're doing on a secondary school site. And what we're actually trying to do is take the paradigm of Wolverhampton, because it has a lot of qualities, as Richard outlined, that it has, you know, a very good way of actually dealing with the car. Actually, it has a system of streets and alleys, and although designed in Victorian times, they just about function to get the car at the back, but you still get the car on the street. Because it has certain footplate sizes and corners and so on, it's actually very diverse. So it has a lot of opportunities for other businesses to happen. I'm afraid these slides are a bit dark, but I mean, that shop in the middle one is actually an insurance broker's. Over the other side, that strange little flat roof building used to be the library, and that's kind of built in at the back because of accessing off the alley. It's now a dentist's, and it's not a very nice building, but it's just, you know, you have these opportunities in a robust kind of development for things to change. So Wolverhampton, you know, is a good model, and not in terms of pastiche, but in terms of paradigm, because it does have these qualities to actually design somewhere which is future-proof, and it's actually quite, you know, relatively easy to do that, and you'll see examples all over London where that happens. The other one is Woolstone, and you can see that the sort of grey rectangle is actually the city centre. And Wolverhampton is about 3 miles from the city centre, so you could say that's a kind of suburban distance. But because it was a town, it functions. It can function absolutely independently, apart from some of the bigger shopping functions and higher education, things like that. Woolstone, although it's only half a kilometre from the city centre, is very much what you would, you know, kind of traditionally look at as a suburb. And it's actually between, untypically for Milton Keynes, it's not between grid roads, it's between the Grand Union Canal on the left and the Ouzel River on the right, and occupies the kind of left-hand side of the slide. The other side of the Ouzel River, where it's green at the moment, is going to be where Milton Keynes Millennium Village is. So that will be built on, but it's part of the linear park system, which is also part of flood control. So it takes the floodwaters down from Milton Keynes to big balancing lakes to the north. So the park actually has a a function of providing flood control. But, you know, very, very... this is focusing on the northern part, where most of the kind of housing development is. And what was touched on earlier is very important to actually have different offers. You know, you don't want all high density, you don't want all low density. And this, interestingly, you know, has some very large single houses which back onto the canal and the grid road. I'm coming to a little development here, which is just to the south of that, which is called Red Norsham, and has 29 2 to 4 bedroom houses on 0.315 hectares. And so it's actually 90 dwellings to the hectare in single family housing. And this was designed by Peter Aldington of Aldington College and Craig in 1980. And it works very, very well. But it's very dense, but on the edge of an awful lot of open space. But is replicable.
You went a little bit there. Yeah.
Sorry? Oh, here we go. Oh, too far.
I think this way.
That way? Oh, right, okay. And, I mean, this is what it looks like, the area around the Ousel Valley and up to the Grand Union Canal, and then the housing behind the trees. So it sits, you know, on the edge of a lot of... No, it's going too far. And this is what the development is like. So it's very intimate, has a kind of sort of, you know, fishing village quality, if you like. But you know, it does work extremely well. This is adopted highway, and because there is a question, you know, about whether it would be adopted highway these days. But and it does just about deal with the parking, but it is very dense, but in single-family housing. Then we're moving on to the Milton Keynes expansion areas, and this is what we're looking at now, and how we actually expand Milton Keynes, and what kind of densities we achieve, what kind of places we achieve. I'm going to focus on the western expansion area, where the council is actually half the landowner. We own 250 acres there, and so it gives us an opportunity to be a bit more proactive. And just stepping back a bit about the original concepts of Milton Keynes, because there are a lot of people in Milton Keynes from the old days who say that the expansion areas are a heresy on what Milton Keynes was all about. But stepping back to what Milton Keynes was originally all about, and actually you could argue it got subverted by the early days of the Development Corporation, it was about this kind of response to the field network, response to natural form. And the original master plan, oh, these all coming up together, but the original master plan, actually it was a grid, but the grid had traffic lights, not roundabouts. There were local centres, but the local centres spanned more than one grid square, so you got connection between grid squares. The housing was round the edge of the grid, and the open space was in the middle, because the grid roads were 30 miles an hour, with lots of side streets coming onto them, connected streets. And a model that was in mind then was actually a kind of a outer London borough, suburban street, where you tend to get the street going through with a local centre either side of the street. And but over in the early days of the Development Corporation, they put roundabouts in instead of traffic lights because it was cheaper, and because the volumes of traffic was such that roundabouts actually dealt with the situation better. By doing that, they increased the speed of the grid road, and it became 70 miles an hour. Because of that, the housing then moved back, retreated into the grid square, and was provided with the buffer zones because of the noise of the roads, and the local centres were moved back in. And so that actually gives you Milton Keynes that you know today. And this is from a presentation by Michael Edwards of UCL entitled Milton Keynes, What Went Wrong? and this is, you know, a typical Milton Keynes street scene. And very fast roads, 70-mile-an-hour roads, right through the city centre. Get from one side of the city centre to the other in about 3 or 4 minutes. And people love it, of course. Highly unsustainable. We're in a league table of cities and countries. Milton Keynes comes just below Australia and just above the USA in length of journey to work and that kind of thing. But try and change it. This is the West Expansion area, and we've introduced a different type of road here. It's called a city street. In effect, it's a boulevard, and an early article that Richard did on Milton Keynes refers to the grid roads as being potentially like boulevards with development either side. And this is what we're trying to do now. So we've introduced the city street, which is a multimodal street. Buses, cars, and the redway for bicycles are all together. And it's 30 miles an hour. The scale of this is about 4 kilometres north-south and about 2.5 east-west. So it's a big area. There's 6,000 homes, has a secondary school, 4 primary schools, and a local centre. But conceptually, it's about actually getting everything closer to the street, building in future-proofing how things can develop. This is a development framework plan. And the brown area in the middle is the kind of the town centre, if you like. And we're very conscious that these days you can't actually build in a lot of retail capacity and things like that because you can't build more than you actually need because you get this problem with, if there's not the uptake in that kind of thing. So we've developed a model, a kind of a design code, if you like, for the developments which are around the centre, to have a certain floor plate size, a certain story height to the ground floor. And so over time, they can change. And again, I mean, and I call this future-proofing no big deal, because if you just look around London, most of London started as Georgian squares or Victorian houses. Certain relationships to the streets, certain floor plate sizes, certain heights and so on, and they became infinitely adaptable for other uses, whether it's lawyers' offices or whether you extend into the street front garden and put a shop there, and you can see it everywhere in London. So it's really sort of building on that kind of paradigm of the past to build it into a new place that isn't stuck because of the way it's actually been designed, is to take away the barriers. We've got a Europan site there, and that's just been, the winner has just been announced, so I can show you the winner. And so we're given over 2 hectares of the West Expansion area to try and develop a, to use as an exemplar for developers to show that you can have good contemporary, relatively high density design in a suburban area, and it doesn't have a hit on land value or sale price. We've reached the stage of choosing a winner. We now have to go through the bit with the developers. So, and you can't get more suburban than that, although at the moment it's really quite rural. And that's where the site is. That's Watling Street, the old Roman road, which is the main road. And the site, this is the city street running through it again. And the site is right on the top end of the city street. So it actually occupies a place on the city street. And so the design code, the brief for that was written to actually reflect the intention for this to be adaptable over time. And one of the things that concerns me is how do you actually make one development distinctive from another, particularly with house builders? And we have so little to play with these days. We don't have local materials because everything comes from Holland or Denmark. And we have very little that we can actually do in a condition like this. But one of the things that we do have is we have the biodiversity, we have the topography, we have the natural features, and we've written the design code for this area very much around those. And every piece of vegetation which is worthwhile actually has to be in the public realm, no back garden hedges, which actually sets up quite an interesting dynamic. And I mean, so much so that, well, you can't really see it there, but there's that big green dot in the middle is a very nice oak tree that disappeared in the development framework because it was in the middle of the city street. Well, we've kept it, and we've diverted the city street around it because it actually forms a gateway to the high street area. So we've actually, we're approaching things, I mean, it's quite subtle, but nonetheless quite useful, really. This is the winning, I'll kind of, oh, I didn't mean to do that. This is the winning scheme, and it does follow basic urban design and a responsive environments kind of criteria, perimeter blocks, although you can get into them with the green stuff. And the green stuff that, it's a very sensitive approach to the brief that we wrote, where the green kind of framework actually comes in and forms a basis for the for the connections within the block. And the base of these units are designed, I mean, I don't think this, I couldn't separate out the, I'm a bit too, the base of these units, particularly on the city street, are very adaptable. And the units themselves are adaptable because, again, another thing that we're trying to do is to get the qualities of family housing in higher density developments, even if you lift that family housing above the ground. And bearing in mind what Richard said about, you know, there aren't that many families in housing anymore. There's 51% or something is people without families. A decent roof terrace is probably, you know, a good external space for somebody like that. Whereas no terrace or no balcony at all, you know, becomes an apartment and less attractive.
Where's the car park?
In the middle. Now, I'm not saying that this is perfect. and of course, Europan is an ideas competition. And it's interesting what you said about 100% parking, Richard, because parking for us in Milton Keynes is 1.8 cars per dwelling, plus 0.25 per dwelling for on-street visitor parking. And so one doesn't do. This one doesn't actually achieve the parking just yet, but it gets pretty close. It's actually in the middle, in these kind of green areas, and but it was by far the best entry, and I mean the section's interesting because again they've developed a very a flexible model where you can actually rent off different floors of the house. Or sell different floors of the house, has these little units at the back, which could be workshop studios or again, you know, kind of American duplex model, and that really ups density. And this has got an average density of about 55, and the density at the front of the site is 70. So that's Europan. How am I doing for time?
Just about.
Is it just about time? Shall I just? Yeah. I mean, I kind of summarise the issues that we're dealing with in terms of neighbourhoods, and you know, the age of the suburb or the age of the small town, I think, is upon us, and I think we should embrace that. And we could actually view it as a series of network cities or network towns, and I've got a couple of examples there, Lille and Madrid. And we need to actually analyse what's there. You know, the analysis from the ground up, the urban morphology, the socio-cultural issues, the economic and the biodiversity issues, very important that we actually understand what a site is. Paradigm, not pastiche. What's in it for us? You know, because somebody raised the issue about public consultation or engagement and so on, and how you persuade people. And certainly in the regeneration areas in Milton Keynes, we have a hard time because most of our regeneration areas are Parker Morris houses with their own front doors, and they're not really interested in being redeveloped. But one of the things that we've been looking at is cooperative housing. Review planning policy to promote diversity, flexibility, adaptability. Futureproofing, no big deal, we've sort of dealt with that. And understand the socio-cultural aspirations and develop new models for higher density. It still kind of gives people what they want. And of course, British people have always been very wedded to the house and the garden. And deal with parking and transport. And if I just kind of, I'll flick through these without saying very much. Oh. Sorry? I'll just keep pressing, yeah. I just want to... It's just going on its own. Sorry? Oh, are you? To hurry me up? Yeah, well, I don't know if we've got time or not, but this is kind of example. I mean, that's Freiburg, and that's actually an example of mixed-use development, solar plus, passive plus as they're calling it. It's a net generator of electricity from, and actually has housing on the roof of a mixed-use building. And Yeah. Just. Oh, I see you doing it there. This is parking in Freiburg, and that's interesting because the cars don't generally park with the houses in the early ones because of, and this is mainly cooperative housing. But they do have some ways of actually putting cars on the other side of the street from the housing, which is quite interesting because houses that back on to dwellings actually have a very negative impact. But on the other side of the street, under these little canopies and things, that seems to be a much better way of doing it. They also have remote parking structures where people actually choose not to take a car to their house. Yeah. And, that's just some of the fantastic, I mean, it is fantastic for neighbourhoods. You know, the whole thing is a home zone, if you like. And kids wander around very young age, all by themselves. Yep. And that's, yes, yeah. That's actually a bit of a cheat. This is in the middle of the city in Milton Keynes, but this is a development where there's enough value for underground parking. And I'm sure that in a lot of your areas there must be enough value in the development for underground parking. And that's obviously a very good way of dealing with it. This one is, this is a traditional US urban form. This is, you know, the little, could you press it again? Yeah. The house at the front, the garage at the back and the alley, and the garage at the back then becomes inhabited over, and so you get a duplex. And on a 9-metre wide plot, you can actually get over 60 dwellings to the hectare in this kind of suburban model. And so you know, in terms of developing, I'm not saying that the alley is actually particularly attractive, but it's you know, it's the idea, the principle, rather than the. But looks incredibly suburban, looks incredibly diverse, is on a grid, of course, and yeah, okay. I mean, future-proofing, no big deal. I mean, we've all seen factory, factory conversions. That's Glasgow, which were originally housing. That's Camden, you know, which was originally housing. And so, and this is again in the middle of the city where development is now happening in that same place with the underground parking. And that's designed so the front of those, the bottom 2 stories of the properties can be converted into other uses. It's a sort of a series of maisonettes. Okay. And that's, of course, what we're normally dealt with. You know, that is not future-proof. That's cul-de-sac. It's never going to change. The only change can be, okay. Shall I just stop? Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry about that. But the role of public building is very important.
Well, you could just go through the slides.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, this is actually using a public building to form a focus for the neighbourhood, and this is what we do as a matter of course with our schools in Milton Keynes now. We actually gave up a little piece of the school site, and this is co-location. Co-location, very important. But I couldn't give you the point. Oh no, that's it. That's it. These are spares. But I'm sorry.